at the World Trade Center Oculus. I'm proud today to announce that our mask force is expanding its reach. The Port Authority is represented by Executive Director Rick Cotton today, New Jersey Transit represented by Kevin Corbett, President and CEO, Amtrak represented by Steve Predmore, Chief Safety Officer, and SEPTA, Leslie Richards, the President and CEO, will be appearing remotely. All those agencies have come together committed to joining our efforts to promote mass usage on public transit and expanding the mask force. Together, we can keep the New York, New Jersey region safe as coronavirus cases spike across the nation. Masks remain an essential tool in fighting this once-in-a-century pandemic. All health experts agree that wearing a mask is the most important thing each of us can do to limit the spread of COVID-19 and minimize health risks to our employees and our customers. Our agencies individually and collectively are doing everything we can to protect public health. But it's crucial that every mass transit rider does his or her part too, and that means wearing a mask. And in New York, it's the law. Those who refuse to wear a mask in the MTA system face a $50 fine. Thankfully, to date, we've only had to issue 10 summonses in thousands of encounters. In most cases, commuters have either put their mask on or adjusted it properly to cover their face when approached by police or MTA staff. We're proud that the vast majority of MTA customers already cover up. Our most recent surveys show that mask compliance on subways and buses and commuter rail in the MTA system is above 95%. But we're not going to be satisfied until there's universal mask compliance. Frankly, there's no excuse not to wear a mask. To date, thanks to generous donations from the from the state and the city to the MTA, we have distributed more than 15 million masks to employees and our customers. Our mask force volunteers have personally distributed over 300,000 of those masks to customers. Masks are also available from dispensers on buses and at station booths, and PPE vending machines have been installed in a number of stations. With COVID cases rising nationwide, this is not the time to get lax. The mask force mission is more important than ever, and the MTA has been never better prepared to fight the pandemic. Our measures include millions of masks and pairs of gloves distributed, extensive disinfection on trains and buses and in stations and offices, that's subways, buses, Metro North, and Long Island Railroad, on-site voluntary COVID screenings, aggressive contract tracing, barriers for our bus operators, and innovative air filtration on commuter railroads. Before I finish, I want to recognize MTA Chief Customer Officer Sarah Meyer, who's with us today, who's a genius. She's the creator of the mask force. This initiative was her idea, and thanks to Sarah's hard work and that of our team, it's been a massive success. And today we're expanding it with our sister agencies. With that, I'll turn the podium over to Rick Cotton, the Executive Director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Rick.
Thank you, Pat. It's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues, Pat from the MTA, Kevin Corbett from New Jersey Transit, our friends from Amtrak, and my colleague Clarelle DeGraff from PATH. Keeping the traveling public safe is the Port Authority's top priority, and we are literally here today to save lives, to stop the spread of the virus, and to protect and ask everyone to cooperate in protecting each other from the virus. And there is no single act that anyone can do more powerful than wearing a mask whenever they are within public transit, whenever they are inside, indeed, every place they go. Now, as part of what the Port Authority has been about, we've worked aggressively to keep our facilities clean, sanitized, and capable of accommodating passengers by enabling them to maintain a safe social distance. In addition, the agency has been laser focused on helping customers comply with our facilities-wide mask policy. Agency regulations make it mandatory to wear face coverings whenever and wherever people are in our facilities. That applies to PATH, it applies to the airports, it applies to the bus terminal, it applies to every single facility that the Port Authority operates. And as of the beginning of this month, anyone who is not complying with that mandate is subject to a $50 fine. We have been active in helping our customers, helping our riders, helping passengers at the airports to comply with that regulation. To date, the Port Authority has distributed more than 736,000 masks. We have held a total of 28 mask giveaways, mask education events, including today, where we distribute masks to riders, to customers, to passengers. Those events have been at the Midtown Bus Terminal, the George Washington Bridge Bus Station, PATH stations, the World Trade Center. By the way, I would like to welcome everyone to the Oculus and to the World Trade Center. These giveaways have occurred during the morning and evening rush hours at each of the facilities to maximize impact, and we began doing this in July. With the holiday season, we're stepping up our mask distribution efforts. We will be holding mask giveaways every day this week, and we will be holding mask giveaways at every airport in the course of next week. The agency reports voluntary compliance with mask wearing is well over 95% across our facilities. The PAPD, our police department, has had an estimated 44,000 interactions with members of the public who are not wearing a mask. The vast majority of these interactions have ended with travelers putting on a face covering, either one of their own or one given to them by a police department officer. To date, the Port Authority has issued 5 summonses for refusal to wear a mask across all of our facilities. We are committed to continuing to take every single step that we can to keep travelers safe, and we are highly focused and ask everyone to cooperate in wearing a mask whenever they are in a Port Authority facility. Thank you, and with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kevin Corbett of New Jersey Transit.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you, Pat, and thanks everyone for coming here. And it is great to be in the Oculus today. When you think of where we were back in March and April and the level of activity when everything's been shut down, it's great to see people coming back to stores. People, the average rider, where they could take New Jersey Transit to PATH, PATH to MTA. For those of us who are regularly in this area, we all know you're constantly going from one mode to the other, and that's why I think it really is a powerful message that all 3 of us are together saying whichever system you're riding, it doesn't matter, please wear the mask. As people are coming back, it's great. Similar to what Pat and Rick said, at New Jersey Transit, we've taken extraordinary measures. We sanitize all vehicles every day. We have daily cleaning of all hot spots and certain spots, even more busier facilities multiple times a day. But it really is a shared responsibility. We need riders. We will do our part. We are similarly in coordinating, not just with the MTA and Port Authority, but nationally and internationally. We have associations we're involved with that look at Singapore, Hong Kong, Berlin. We share all that data and information of best practices, and we're all doing various research. New Jersey Transit's working closely with Rutgers Kate on whether it be UV or other disinfection technologies to make sure that we have the safest, cleanest possible ride. But it really does put it back on the riders as well to do their share, that shared responsibility, and that is, if you are sick, please stay home. You're not doing anybody a favor by trying to go to work or do something when you're sick. And otherwise, if you're coming on any of our facilities, any of our bus, light rail, or rail, make sure you have the mask on. And that is the single most important act you can do to prevent the spread of the virus. We are glad to have people coming back. We see ridership starting to come back. But it is really important that people do wear the mask. Our police force, New Jersey Transit Police Force, has had over 1,600 sorties with promoting the uses of masks, making sure doing inspections, as well as just normal practice. All our officers have masks. Our bus drivers and our major terminals and facilities have masks. They need them, so there's no excuse not to have them. And we know about COVID fatigue. I think all of us feel it one time or the other. But there's no excuse. This is, with the winter coming, this is a perfect time. Just keep the mask on. You go about, you're safe riding transit, but it's important that we keep reinforcing that message. And working together, we can definitely succeed in slowing the spread as we get life back to normal as we look forward in going into the new year. Glad to be part of the mask force, and again, thanks to Pat, Sarah, and Rick for that. Would also like to say that it's not just in the region. We also have Amtrak as partners for all of us as well. And I'd like to, with that, turn it over to Amtrak's Chief Safety Officer, Steve Predmore. Steve?
Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Predmore, the Executive Vice President and Chief Safety Officer for Amtrak. And on behalf of Amtrak, I'd like to extend our thanks to our partners who've come together at MTA, New Jersey Transit, Port Authority of New York, and New Jersey, PATH, and SEPTA for today's Mask Force-a-Palooza event to highlight the importance of wearing a mask and sharing the same commitment that Amtrak has made to customer and employee safety. As Chief Safety Officer of Amtrak, I'm extremely proud of the efforts our team has made to keep our trains and stations clean over the last few months. This includes working with our new partner, RB, the makers of Lysol products, and also partnering with George Washington University Millikan Institute School of Public Health, an extraordinary group of faculty and students who are providing us with the best guidance around public health improvement. Through this support and these partnerships, we've completely revamped our operation from beginning to end and are providing a new standard of safe travel in these very challenging times. That's what Amtrak's doing, but the one thing that's been very clear that we all need to do now is to wear a mask and to wear it properly. It can be it's one of the things that makes the most difference in reducing the spread of COVID-19, and it protects ourselves and those around us. For Amtrak, that means that it is our policy and we require all customers and employees to wear a face mask or covering that fully covers the entire mouth and nose and fits snugly against the side of the face and secures under the chin at all times while on board or in our stations, unless you're actively eating or drinking. In addition, based on the best guidance that we have, neck gaiters, open chin, triangle bandanas, mask-containing valves, all of those are not appropriate and proper wear. And over the course of the next few weeks as we go into the travel season, you'll see increased signage and announcements in our stations about wearing masks, wearing them properly, and what constitutes a proper mask. Additionally, as we go into the holiday travel season, our Amtrak ambassadors, which is part of the Amtrak experience during this time of year, will have masks available to hand out to customers. So if you don't have a mask, if you don't have the proper mask, or your mask breaks, we've got you covered. It's important that we all look out for each other and do our part. As someone whose entire job is all about safety, it's important for me to share the message on the importance of wearing a mask in trains and stations, but you'll hear it from every Amtrak employee, and I'm sure you'll hear it from all the employees from every organization represented here today. And we stand here together in collaboration, as well as individual companies, to communicate and enforce these policies. And if we can do that, we'll all be safer, and we'll be able to reverse this trend that we're experiencing right now. Thank you. Pat?
Thank you, Steve. Now we're going to hear from Leslie Richards, who's the president of SEPTA, which runs the transit system in Philadelphia, in the Philadelphia area.
Thanks, Pat. It's great to be here announcing Mask Force Philly as the general manager of SEPTA, the transit authority serving the greater Philadelphia region, including parts of New Jersey and Delaware. This second wave is proving to be a formidable opponent. To beat it, all of us need to do our part. That starts by recognizing that wearing a mask or another facial covering in public, and specifically on public transit, is quite simply the best thing any of us can do. It's the single most powerful weapon we have against the virus. It greatly reduces the risk to you, your friends, your coworkers, and your loved ones, as well as many others you may not know and encounter daily in stores and elsewhere. For all of these reasons, I am proud to announce today that SEPTA will be joining with our peer transit and railroad agencies in the Northeast to launch SEPTA Mask Force Philly early next year. This effort expands on our successful social distancing coaches program, where SEPTA employee volunteers engage customers about our face mask requirement and give tips for social distancing at stations and on vehicles to promote safe and healthy travel habits. SEPTA customers have already stepped up and shown they care. Today, on average, about 90% of all customers on our buses, trains, and trolleys are wearing a mask properly every day, and we cannot afford to let up. Mask Force Philly will be reaching out to all riders with tips about how to properly wear a mask, to offer a mask to those without one, and to provide a complimentary mask to anyone who wishes to have one as a backup so that they never are left unprotected. SEPTA has been and continues to be an essential service that riders can count on. Our system is clean, it's safe, and through the toughest times, we ride on. Pat, back to you.
Leslie, thanks. And our last speaker is going to be a former colleague of mine, Clarelle DeGraff, who is the Director and General Manager of PATH. Clarelle.
Thank you, Pat. Just really wanted an opportunity to say good morning to everyone, and thank you so much for joining all of us here. And I think it's a great day where you would see the executives of the major transportation agencies of this region take time off to be here to say how important wearing a mask is. We know from our health departments, we know from the CDC, that wearing a mask is a powerful tool against this virus that has close to decimated our country. And having the executives here to demonstrate the importance to be here is a very important thing. So we just really want to thank you and remind you to please wear your mask and wear it properly. Thank you.
Some of your colleagues mentioned wearing a mask properly. I know you've said you've got 95% compliance on the MTA, but one of the things we see on social media is folks who've got it like this, not wearing it the right way. Are those riders subject to a possible summons? And why would you say that there have only been 10 summonses handed out since you started?
Well, let me address the last question first, Andrew. First, I think the media today that joined us over at Fulton Street and here at the World Trade Center Oculus observed what our statistics show, which is the overwhelming majority of our customers are wearing a masks. And the demand for additional masks is people want them. So that's one. Two is what happens when an MTA employee enters a car, or police officer, NYPD, or MTA police. Someone not wearing a mask who has one will put it on. They'll adjust it accordingly. And our goal is not to raise revenue or to issue summonses. Our goal is to have people wear the mask appropriately. The third point I would make is that part of Sarah Meyer's plan here, and you've seen the signage on subways and buses and subway stations, is the correct way to wear a mask. So we're addressing that directly. And the other agencies that are here today, and they can each speak for themselves, are doing the same thing. I think that the mask compliance that we've reported and that each of them spoke today is an incredibly important, it's the single most important thing any customer can do in terms of protecting themselves. The CDC affirms that now, in terms of protecting their fellow commuters and our employees.
Yeah, Pat, along those lines, what is the, you said 95% mask compliance. What is the percentage of mask users who are not wearing their masks properly? And then just to tack on to Andrew's question, in terms of, visual signs on trains telling riders to wear their masks, is there something you're looking into separate from filling ad space? Are there other places where you could put those reminders so that it doesn't require a police officer or an MTA employee on the train to get everybody up to compliance?
Look, I mentioned the signage that Sarah Meyer and her team came up with in terms of wearing masks correctly. There are also announcements on buses, on subways. The out front signage, the electric signage in the subways has the message, you got to wear a mask, there's a fine if you don't, and here's how to wear it correctly. And we're also incredibly active on social media getting the message out. And I think the sign of success is the fact that we're reporting these high levels of mask compliance and relatively small numbers of summonses. Those who wear mask compliance, it averages, but it's 10% or below. And as I said earlier, our goal is to have universal mask compliance, and that means everybody wearing a mask and wearing it correctly.
Getting off topic?
Okay, well, this is a question for Pat, for Rick Cotton, for Mr. Corbett from NJ Transit, and all of you. Everybody's wondering, you all have deficits because of the pandemic and because of a loss of ridership, and everybody is hoping that you get a stimulus package from Washington. Whether you get all or part of it remains to be seen, but if you get extra money, will there still have to be fare and toll hikes on various services? Specifically to the MTA, will you be able to resume 24-hour service?
So there's a whole bunch of questions in there, Marcia. So let me address the 24-hour service. We've been clear from the beginning, since May 6th, when we instituted the 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. closure, that the closure would continue because it is so important and pivotal to being able to disinfect every car in every station, that it would continue during the pandemic. The pandemic is obviously still here, and in some parts of the country, unfortunately, raging. With respect to the finances, and then I'll turn it over to Rick and Kevin Corbett for them to weigh in, I would say the following. The election of the president-elect is a very positive step. Every school child in the country knows that he's called Amtrak Joe, and that he rode it regularly between Wilmington and Washington, D.C. when he was a senator, and throughout his entire career has been an ardent supporter of mass transit and public transit. That's a positive. Obviously, the arm of the government, the part of the branch of the government that stood in the way of the HEROES Act and other financing after CARES in the spring was the United States Senate, led by Senator McConnell. I don't have any perspective into what's going to happen with respect to the Georgia runoff races, but it is not clear. It is not clear that there's a clear path to funding, speaking just for the MTA, in the amount of $12 billion, which is what we need. And I'll turn it over to Rick. And
one more. So does that mean that you're still looking at fare hikes and toll hikes for the MTA?
Well, look, as we've said, no one at the MTA wants to reduce service or lay off any of our heroic colleagues, period. No one wants to do that. Our hand may be forced if the federal government doesn't come through with the funding. We will be discussing these issues at our board meeting tomorrow and in December. And I think it would be inappropriate for me to get ahead of the board and the public discussion tomorrow.
Well, let me speak to the continuing devastation of the Port Authority's revenue lines by the pandemic. Our airports are still down 75% in terms of passengers from pre-COVID levels. Our PATH commuter railroad system is still down 75% from pre-COVID levels. Traffic over our bridges and tunnels down 15%. that level of decline in terms of our riders and passengers simply is at this point costing us $150 million of lost revenue every single month. We are currently approaching 1.3, a little north of $1.3 billion in lost revenue in just the 8 months since the virus began. Our estimate over 2 years is that we will lose $3 billion worth of revenue. There is no way that the agency can make up that degree of revenue loss. We have gone to Washington and asked for $3 billion of federal aid to fill in that hole. If we do not get that, we will be forced to significantly reduce our capital plan and cut back on our capital spending. That is a terrible thing, enormously counterproductive for the region. It means that our infrastructure will not be upgraded, and even more importantly, it means that we will be cutting back at exactly the time that the region needs desperately an economic recovery. We want to contribute to that economic recovery. It requires Washington to come to the table. The stalemate that has existed up to now within the Congress and with the administration on an additional stimulus bill is just a tragedy for the nation. It's a tragedy for the region. We are hopeful that with the election of President-elect Biden, that the dynamic will change. We know that he is a champion of improved infrastructure, and he's a champion of transit. But it will require the cooperation of the Congress. But we look forward to working with the new administration. We look forward to working with the Congress, and we will continue to advocate for critically needed federal funding as we have. Thank you.
Marcia, from on New Jersey side, certain similarities, obviously, with Pat and Rick. But for us, we have enough CARES Act funding that'll get us through till next May, June, which is our fiscal year. But we really have to start looking after that. It's who goes over the waterfall in the canoe, who's first ahead of the other. So it is obviously a great concern for us. We have done a lot with, since the pandemic hit, where we had, we were a single-digit ridership on both bus and rail, light rail. Bus, we had rear door entry, so we weren't collecting fares like Pat, and we coordinated with Pat on what's the best practice to make sure we protect our workforce, but to get the riders back coming in, collecting the fares through the front door, and by having the protection for the bus drivers, et cetera, operators. So we've done a lot to try to minimize financial impact. But interestingly, in New Jersey, our intrastate bus is now back to 70%. We see a lot of people back and being responsible, even self-policing. We do a lot of our own policing, but people, sort of like quiet cars if they see somebody not wearing a mask. So we've done a lot to make sure that people feel comfortable coming back. But we really see coming into New York, particularly the Port Authority bus terminal, as Rick knows, we're at about 35% on the interstate into New York. And on our passenger rail, very similar to I know what Pat and his team see, we're at about 20, 22, 23% of ridership. So we really need till New York comes back. We know that for essential workers, I think everyone saw how people used our system and how vital it was, and we still see that playing a role as the economy comes back. But without that funding, it's a catch-22. People want to have as much social distancing on our buses and trains as possible. So that means having the maximum frequency, keeping that sort of regular service frequency, while having that less ridership and less ridership revenue. So that will be a critical gap. And I think a really key point that Rick brought up is the impact. One of the most insidious things for anybody who's in the transit industry is seen when you start eating your seed corn. You raid your capital to cover your operating. New Jersey Transit, I've spent the last 2.5 years since I got there digging out from a decade of disinvestment and raiding our capital, and it had just really devastating impact on New Jersey Transit. So we were finally getting out from under that. We have a 5-year capital plan, but it has a $5 billion gap. We're lucky this year we have about $2.3 billion in projects underway, and then Portal Bridge, which we just secured, that's another $1.8 billion. So right now we're very busy, and to Rick's point, this is a great time when the market's a bit soft, where it was overheated before, to be getting capital projects that are needed. These are investments that last decades, if not centuries, as we've seen with some of these bridges. So this is a time to be investing. And my concern, I share the optimism, but also I'm a little bit concerned that there's so much optimism that we are competing traditionally, even when there's funding and more generous Congress and more generous White House, they also tend to be more generous to everyone else. So we're fighting for funding with healthcare, education, and a lot of other things. So even if there's more enthusiasm, I'm concerned we have to make sure we have really strong advocacy in Washington to make sure that transit, because we are the underpinning of the economy and the economic recovery, both on operating and capital. So we're going to be fighting very hard to make sure that is not just the intent, but also that at the end of the day we get that funding. Pardon? Fare hikes? No, I think this would be the worst time, and that's up to Governor Murphy. And I think he's very concerned, is both about rating capital to operating, but also to make sure that the people who are most impacted are the essential workers. So to be hitting them with a fare increase, to me that'd be the last thing we'd want to do. And particularly for New Jersey Transit, people suffered for us as we made some painful decisions to finally get back to where we're operating smoothly and have good routine service. So to hit them with a fare increase right now would be the last thing I'd want to do.
As Marcia pointed out, you're all looking for heaps of money from Congress, but a new presidential administration could also mean unlocking of New Start funds for the MTA. Rick, it could mean new guidance from DHS at the airports. Pat, the MTA is presenting a budget tomorrow. Has the lack of progress with the presidential transition had any impact on your financial planning? And Rick, has it had any impact on the way that you're planning your operations for next year?
The question is whether the delay in transition has any impact. The answer is, from an MTA point of view, the delay in transition, I can't speak on what effect it's had on the president-elect and his team. From our point of view, so far, no.
Well, let me begin by saying every single facility of the Port Authority is open, operating. We're committed to maintain first-class operations now and going into the future. The challenge for us is $3 billion worth of lost revenue within a 24-month period is something that the agency itself cannot fill in. Therefore, we're forced to go to D.C. We normally don't go to D.C. We're forced in this instance to go to D.C. to ensure that we're able to build the infrastructure that we've committed to build and that which has been provided for in our capital plan. Delay from Washington is simply going to be delay for our ability to move forward. And at some point that becomes highly, highly problematic. So I can't speak specifically to the transition, but if we do not get federal support, it will have real-world consequences in terms of our ability to rebuild the infrastructure, to build world-class infrastructure, which is what the region requires. So we are delaying decisions. We have put projects that are not in construction on pause until we understand what D.C. is or is not going to do, and we need clarity, and we need it as soon as possible.